Tonight, Jihad creep in Europe and its dirty dealings with the left. And what exactly is Ontario's premier smoking? But first, animal rights activists have their sights on your next hunting trip. I'm Faith Goldy, and you're watching On the Hunt.
Do you not have an answer for them, Justin? There is no left and right on this one. There is, however, right and wrong.
Good evening, Canada. There's a predator on the continent, the anti-hunting lobby, and it would seem their feeding grounds are growing. This week saw not one, but two African hunting expos canceled, first in Toronto and then in Saskatoon. The reason for the shutdown? Two online petitions by animal rights activists. Meanwhile, the event organizers are in a jam after having signed, contracts with the respective hotels, and attendees might be SOL after booking trips and securing their visas. But let's be honest, the animal justice folks don't give an endangered rat's rear end about all that. All they care about is the sustainable utilization of wildlife in Africa, right? No, I'm totally kidding. Their arguments are based solely on hippy-dippy emotion, not science. So, I would like to dedicate the next 60 seconds of my show specifically to the animal justice crusaders. Oh, and science. Did you know that without hunters, African animals like the black wildebeest and the white rhino very likely wouldn't exist today? See, safari hunting is a huge industry in about a dozen African countries, generating hundreds of millions in profit and providing tens of thousands of jobs. But who cares about the humans, right? Let's get back to the animals. Peer-reviewed and academically cited studies by researchers like Peter A. Lindsay and Nigel Leader-Williams have scientifically proven hunting is indeed consistent with actual, measurable, conservation-related benefits for various species, including some found on the African continent. Take white rhinos and elephants, for instance. The legalization of white rhinoceros hunting in South Africa has motivated private landowners to reintroduce the species onto their lands. As a result, the country has seen a, wait for it, increase of white rhinos from fewer than 100 to more than 11,000 today, even as limited numbers were killed as trophies. And implementation of controlled, legalized hunting was also beneficial for Zimbabwe's elephants. Implementing trophy hunting doubled the area of country under wildlife management thanks to the inclusion of private lands. And as a result, the area of suitable land available to elephants and other wildlife has increased, reversing the problem of habitat loss and helping to maintain a sustained population increase in Zimbabwe's elephant population. See, ensuring local communities have a stake in their wildlife and its management through the incentivization of the hunting industry is precisely what grows these animal populations and stops poachers and helps to keep many of their systems in balance. Look no further than what happened to the cod population when seal imports became banned, or the negative effect on caribou and moose populations when we cut black bear season out of the hunter's calendar. So, with the utmost respect to the anti-hunting crowd, do your research. Because the way I see it, if any of these majestic animals become extinct, it'll be because of your misinformed feelings, not the hunters' legal safaris. And so without further ado, I would like to introduce our very patient and very passionate guest, Jason St. Michael of Safari Club International, SCI, is a hunter's heritage group, which also does a great deal of philanthropic work throughout the world. You build schools, habitat enhancement, orphanages, everything, the whole shebang. Jason, start things off. I want to ask you your initial reaction to the news that not one, but two hunting expos were canceled.
Faith, first of all, thank you for having me.
Of course.
We're very disappointed in the hotels. Obviously, they're going against the tourism industry, number one. We've got, not myself personally, but the organization has people coming from Africa, as you said. They've got visas and travel plans and reservations already made, and we're turning them away. The city of Toronto, the city of Saskatoon are turning them away. This is legal, legitimate ethical hunting, which promotes conservation and wildlife population and wildlife management.
Now, I want to make a point for our audience to know, I did ask one of the organizers of the first petition in Toronto, Camille Labchuk, she's an animal justice lawyer, to join us, but unfortunately she was unable to make it. She's still welcome to come on the show because I would love to have this debate with her, and maybe we'll have you back as well, Jason. I want to kind of backtrack a little bit because I think that there's an elephant, or shall I say a lion in the room, that needs some discussing. That's Cecil the lion. Can you touch a little bit on kind of the bad PR that started and the trend that is now developing of kind of this online attack against hunters that really seems to have reached fever pitch with Cecil? What did that do for our community?
Absolutely. Cecil the lion was an emotional reaction. I get it. It's a beautiful, majestic animal, and people didn't want to see what happened. Unfortunately, it's a reality of life. He had reached his prime, which meant normally he is not contributing back to wildlife population. It was a legal, ethical, fair hunt. Mm-hmm. It was blown out of proportion. Things like murdered and slaughtered and left to die. Words were used in the media, which isn't actually fact. I wasn't there. I can't comment on it. But I do know that these type of hunts are not done just willy-nilly, and generally are not done illegally or unethically. They're done with extreme permits. Government officials are generally with the hunter. So for all of this to get blown out the way it did, we're pretty disappointed in the public. About a week later, there was a human killed in the same park by a lion, and we heard nothing, like nothing about it. So what that tells me is a lion, an animal, is more important than a human life with a family.
Well, you're talking to a pro-lifer over here, so you're preaching to the choir. Just one more topic on, one more question on the lion specifically. Without the incentivization of trophy hunting, if you will, and I don't want to paint the entire continent with one brush, but how do African communities view lions? They're predators, aren't they?
Absolutely. A lion has really, how can I say this in a nice way, it has no benefit to the average person in a place like Africa. They're a predator, so they kill cattle and livestock, and they kill humans. If hunting wasn't there and there wasn't a value on this animal, they would be poisoned or killed off. But because of the hunting and the trophy industry, the hunting industry, we ensure that the populations are there. They are also ensuring the populations are. I mean, they get employment. Mm-hmm. I mean, trackers, skinners, cleaners, laundry, drivers, tourism, airports, rental cars. I mean, it goes on and on and on. It's a $40 billion a year industry in Africa. Now,
part of that industry is also ensuring that poachers be kept away from these animals, so that way they are legally culled, if you will, and that there is actually some sort of financial gain. Do you think that some of this animal justice crusade is perhaps misdirected at hunters when really they should be focusing on the poachers?
Absolutely. I mean, groups like Safari Club International, we fund anti-poaching efforts, we fund conservation efforts, humanitarian, education. I mean, what are these groups doing? I don't know if you realize this, but there was a study by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife between 2008 and 2011 that shows the average sportsmen and women contribute $8 million a day, not a year, a day, to conservation efforts. And that includes poaching efforts and so on and so forth. What are these anti-hunting groups, what are they doing to give back? Mm-hmm. What are they doing to help wildlife populations? I understand they love animals, and I can appreciate that. And I understand it's very hard to understand that by hunting them and allowing hunting, it increases wildlife populations. But do a little research, understand what is going on out there. You'll look much more professional. I'm sure you'll have much more progress in your in what they want to accomplish.
I'd agree with you, but I'm also going to say that, frankly, they make a lot of noise, and they are successful. I look no further than what we just saw in Canada this week. 2 expos canceled, Cecil the lion, I mean, it's just case after case after case. What I worry about is that this rising tide of animal justice crusaders are going to start to seriously affect our public policy making process based on zero science whatsoever. And here I want to give a little shout out to the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, CITES. I'm worried that these emotionally driven groups are going to start to create change to both national and international treaties and laws. Talk to me a little bit about your concerns about emotion trumping fact in the public policy world.
Absolutely, and that is a definite concern. If you look at, I'll give you a couple examples. The polar bear in Canada, they fought to have it uplisted, and the polar bear has actually increased in its numbers. Leona Gugluk, which was the Minister of the Environment up until recently, she used to tell us at our Hunter and Angler Advisory Panel meetings, the polar bear is increasing in population, not decreasing. Yet these emotional reactions have went and fought to stop the importation of polar bears into the United States. Groups like Animal Justice are fighting to stop the start of the spring black bear hunt again. It was stopped 20 years ago by an emotional group, and they fought to stop it. It was strictly political. We have to look at science and follow science-based to make these decisions. We can't look at political or emotional decisions.
Look, my thing is this. You want to be passionate about your cause, be passionate, just make sure it is on strong, factual foundations. Jason, I so appreciate you being here. You want to tell the folks where they can find you? Is there an internet site you want to direct them to?
Absolutely. You can go to www.sci-canada.com. All
right, thanks so much. Folks, don't touch that keyboard. When we return, the week's Tops headlines. That after this short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Time now for the top stories we're tracking for you this week. In international news, the Islamic State is now eyeing oil targets beyond their stronghold in Syria, while U.S. officials say Libya is in their sights. Meantime, the terrorist state has issued a decree to its members authorizing them to kill newborn babies with Down syndrome. And if the beheadings, stonings, and no drinking rules weren't enough to turn you off, ISIS has now banned TV to ensure fighters and oppressed subjects aren't watching foreign channels which condemn their barbarity. And stateside, the Obama administration is changing its tune. Secretary of State John Kerry said this week the U.S. is no longer asking for regime change in Syria. To quote hotair.com, Obama wants regime change. Putin doesn't want regime change canceled. But Americans might be too distracted to notice as race warriors regain control of the microphone. Black Lives Matter protesters are now threatening riots across Baltimore after jurors said they could not reach a verdict in the trial of the officer charged with involuntary manslaughter in the case of Freddie Gray. And closer to home, the provincial so-called expert advisory panel on euthanasia released its report this week. Included among the 43 recommendations to come from the stacked deck of pro-euthanasia activists that the right of euthanasia be extended to children, that nurses be able to kill their patients too, that health professionals be protected from liability, that no waiting or reflection period be permitted for patients after declaration, and that the whole thing be publicly funded. And federally speaking, Trudeau's Liberals are setting aside a number of refugee applications due to unspecified, quote, concerns, according to government officials, adding that setting the applicants aside doesn't necessarily mean that those refugees will be barred from coming to Canada eventually. Meantime, the feds are taking, quote, exceptional measures to provide welcome kits to Syrian refugees, but the suppliers of goods and services will be kept secret for so-called security reasons. And, of course, costs won't be disclosed. Oh, and that whole story about the Ottawa school children choir singing welcome songs to the Syrian refugees, yeah, that was revealed to be totally untrue. Finally, some good news and an update on our show last week. Ontario is delaying their ban on using electronic cigarettes in public. The province was set to ban the use of e-cigs in public spaces, offices, businesses, and even in vape shops beginning January 1, but is now reviewing their own regulations. On behalf of folks across the province, I'd like to give a shout out to Vape Dad, a freedom-fighting friend of On the Hunt, MPP Randy Hillier. Sir, Your next bottle of e-juice is on me. All right, those are your week's Tops headlines. When we return, I got my Colt 45. I hope you got your 2 zigzags, because Princess of Pot Jodie Emery's got that tumbleweed. That's next.
Looking for the perfect gift? Did you know TheRebel.media has a store? Make a statement with a t-shirt. Have your morning coffee in a Fearless Travel coffee mug. There's even an Ezra Levant bobblehead. It's a one-stop shop for the perfect gift. And don't forget to pick up something for yourself. Go to TheRebel.media/store to find out more.
Welcome back. Well, it took 20 years of complaints for Ontario's government to get liquor into our corner stores, but Mary Jane might get fast-tracked. When weed is legal, we want it in our liquor stores. That's the word from Premier Kathleen Wynne, and, well, she's not alone. Let's look at the bullet points. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has promised to give ganja the green light, but the distribution model is anyone's guess. Now, government, private dispensaries, and corner stores all want a piece of the pot pie. Joining us now is the Princess of Pot and Cannabis Crusader, my friend Jodie Emery. Jodie, first up, I got to ask you out of the gates, do you really believe that we're going to see legalization of marijuana in 2016?
I do believe we will. I think Justin Trudeau is moving very quickly on his file, but we're also seeing support from countries worldwide where legalization is not just being talked about, but it's being implemented.
Now, I do want to get into the distribution method, because I think that now that this public policy is going to be reality, we have to discuss how it's going to be rolled out. But I do want you to address the folks at home who, have seen certain studies coming out of places like Colorado, and they have concerns. Some would say quite legitimate. You look at things like traffic fatalities going up in Colorado after marijuana was legalized. Emergency room visits up by 57%. Hospitalizations due to marijuana up by 82%. Is there a public policy in which we can minimize these sorts of concerns if legalized pot is going to be part of our future?
Well, when pot is legal, we can talk about it openly and honestly. So if there are people who do have trouble using it, they can seek out help without being criminalized or punished with the law for that. But in terms of the harms being done, percentages are pretty easy because, you can just have something happen twice, and that's twice as often as once. And with the fatalities and all that in Colorado, alcohol is typically tied into any accidents where pot is mentioned for traffic fatalities. But the United States actually did some studies and found last year, or rather this year, that the Highway Transportation and Traffic Administration found that marijuana users are actually much safer than people who drink alcohol, and even just as safe as people who haven't consumed any substances. And that echoes the findings of a few different studies where they say marijuana doesn't really impair people. There's not evidence for it, but if anybody is smoking pot or consuming pot and they're not suitable to drive, they shouldn't be allowed to drive. But that's about performance, not about what you consume.
So are you saying that there should be a two-tiered system in which some people can smoke pot behind the wheel and others can't?
No, I don't think a two-tiered system is fair, but I think responsible use is important. Some people out there can drink a glass of wine at dinner and it won't affect them at all. Others will have wine and they should not drive because it'll hit them pretty hard if they don't drink regularly. So marijuana use is kind of the same. For a lot of people out there who use cannabis, it's medical, and for them it helps them be able to move and to actually be able to operate a vehicle. But again, responsible use is important here. A lot of pharmaceutical pain pills and different prescriptions people use tell them not to operate heavy machinery, and yet they're getting behind the wheel anyway. But again, it's about deciding whether or not you're actually suitable to drive, and that's all about performance.
Final question on the concerns. Do you think that part of any sort of public policy plan should include equipping our police forces with the proper tools, expensive as they are, for testing people for marijuana use behind the wheel?
Well, again, it's about performance. Impairment is proven by performance. So if you're driving and you're tired and you're swerving because you haven't slept, a police officer should be able to observe that unsafe driving and pull you over. And in most cases, when police do witness a vehicle driving unsafely, they pull it over and they find out whether it was a cell phone distracting, tiredness, kids yelling in the back, or whatever it may be. But when you're talking about testing people's bodies to find out what they've consumed that may have made them impaired, that's fine for alcohol because you can actually see the alcohol limit. But with marijuana, it impacts people differently, and it stays in your system longer, detectably, but not actually affecting you. So marijuana screening for drivers seems to be focused on drawing blood or saliva from a person to try and prove they consumed pot and therefore are dangerous. And that's not really fair when it should be based on the performance. If you're driving safely or not, that's all based on performance, and police should be able to determine with their eyes what's actually causing that impaired driving.
Okay, let's get to the fun stuff for you then. LCBO, do you think that's the appropriate place within which pot could be dispensed?
I don't like the idea of monopolizing the distribution as they have an interest in doing, or an oligopoly where just there are a few providers. But, more options is always better, but I'll take what we can get and always ask for more. Although you did note that liquor laws are still just changing now, and prohibition of alcohol ended quite some time ago. So I believe we're going to have quite a few decades of the provinces and different areas trying to figure out what the best distribution model is. I'm a believer in free markets. I think it should be open for everyone to take part. Starbucks doesn't shut down little boutique coffee shops. Molson Brewery isn't shutting down craft brewers. There's room for everybody in this industry, and Canadians consume a lot of pot. And one benefit of having marijuana available in these liquor stores is that it's a safer choice. So for some people who have trouble with drinking, or they're tired of drinking being the only option for enjoyable recreation, they can find cannabis as a much safer alternative.
Now let's go on to the topic of taxation. Ontario is broke. Quebec is there too. Federally speaking, we're on our way to deficit town. I think that the feds, as well as the provinces, are going to be looking to tax the crap out of this, frankly. So that's probably going to mean pretty bad news for users out there. How would you like to see this roll out?
Well, we shouldn't put any extra taxes on marijuana. It doesn't need the sin tax that alcohol and cigarettes have. There are actual societal and physical harms that are costly, and we can measure that, and that's why alcohol and tobacco are taxed. But marijuana doesn't have the societal or health costs that those substances have. So there shouldn't be any sort of extra or added sin tax. Unfortunately, as you noted, governments are broke, and my job as an activist for years was trying to convince governments to accept legalization for the monetary reasons, for the tax benefits we could reap, and for the money we could save from diverting from law enforcement. But when you tell government there are billions of dollars out there being given to gangsters, and they should have the money instead, government, they like that money, and they like the idea of taking a revenue source away from gangs, but they'd like it to remain the same value. Unfortunately, prohibition inflates value, and if prohibition isn't in place, marijuana's value should come down. But the government is interested in maybe maintaining those prohibition prices so they can take as much as possible. The only benefit I saw out of taxing marijuana in any special way for Colorado State was that they're actually building schools and hospitals with marijuana money, and I can't really say that's a bad idea, but I would prefer government to find better ways to cut their spending elsewhere and reprioritize the spending of our tax dollars that they already do take from us, which is quite substantial.
I think there are a lot of On the Hunt viewers that would agree with you there, because knowing the Ontario government, we probably see this taxation money going into a vaporized gas plant. All right, tell folks at home very quickly, we got a hodgepodge of both libertarians and SoCons over here. If they want to yell at you, agree with you, where can they find you very quickly?
You can find me Jodie Emery on all social media. That's Jodie Emery, and that's at Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and anywhere online. Just Google it.
All right, thanks so much, Jodie, for your time. Now, from marijuana to the new Mecca, the Islamification of Europe, Paul Joseph Watson is on the hunt. That's next.
Ontario residents are being hosed on electricity prices. The latest Auditor General's report says we've been overcharged by $37 billion over the last several years. That works out to nearly $2,800 for every man, woman, and child. Why? Mismanagement and bad policy choices from the Ontario Liberals. It's going to cost us billions more in coming years. Energy Minister Bob Chiarelli won't take responsibility. He's lashing out. It's time for Bob to go. If you agree, go to firebob.ca. That's firebob.ca and make your voice heard.
Welcome back, folks. You're about to enter the PC free zone. If you can't stomach fearless questions or authentic answers, then I suggest you switch off your monitors now. Otherwise, buckle up, because we've got one heck of a segment coming up. As the fastest growing religion in Europe, Islam has the region divided, but will it see the region destroyed? Let's take a look at the bullet points. Over 1 million migrants have poured into Europe this year. Meanwhile, German Chancellor Angela Merkel said this week that she wants to, quote, drastically decrease the number of refugees coming into her country, a clear compromise on her forced integration open door policy. Meantime, Sharia courts already exist and are operating in nations like Britain, France, Holland, and Austria, all as reports of Muslim no-go zones are on the rise across Europe. As 30% of Brits say they support Muslim immigration ban, is it any wonder we've seen a surge in the far right? And what are the consequences to liberty and the European way of life? Joining us now is Paul Joseph Watson. Paul, you were just in Brussels, where you were essentially chased out of certain areas. You were also accosted in Paris. And yet we're being told by the likes of people like your own mayor, Boris Johnson, that Muslim no-go zones are legend, fiction, and that these migrants, well, all they want is a safe haven. What is your view on the current reality facing Europe?
Well, the reality is, Faith, that you don't have to go to, quote, right-wing talking points to see the truth here. ISIS's own manifesto, released a couple of weeks ago, says that they will exploit the refugee crisis to infiltrate jihadists. We had this warning months ago, but now again it was in their own manifesto that they would infiltrate Europe, create these Muslim no-go ghettos, and use them as centres of radicalised power. So as you mentioned, we went to Molenbeek in Brussels just a few days basically after the Paris massacre. We went there in the daytime as night fell. We ended up being chased out of there. First, we were denied service at a restaurant because we weren't Muslim. Then we were actually chased out of there. We were followed by cars. Again, no police in sight, despite the fact it was the day after the raids on the Paris terror suspects in that very town. So this claim that Muslim no-go areas don't exist, or, they're a conspiracy theory invented by the right wing, is a complete misnomer, as you saw with the whole Trump controversy in the UK. The mayor of London, Boris Johnson, came out and said, I'll walk around with Trump, no problem. There are no Muslim no-go areas in London. Of course, if he does that, he's going to be surrounded by 20 news cameras and a phalanx of police officers. The actual British police came out the day after and said, that's complete nonsense. There are Muslim no-go areas across the United Kingdom. We don't go there because we're attacked. So that narrative was immediately destroyed. These no-go areas exist. ISIS has expressed an intention to create more of them. And that's a big threat because Molenbeek is the jihadist capital of Europe. That's where all these terrorists came out of. Most of the Paris massacre suspects came out of there. So this is a genuine problem, and we can't hide behind political correctness and pretend that it doesn't exist.
Well, there seems to be really two strains, those that are still hiding behind that veil. And the mainstream media is frankly now being forced to report so many of these stories, including the no-go zones. And I just want to share a few points with our viewers at home, a bit of an update on these new migrant meccas, places like Sweden and Germany. Sweden today, it came out that homosexuals are now being accosted on the streets by these Muslim migrants, snakes being hung around their neck. Also, disturbing reports that things are being posted in people's letterboxes across Sweden saying basically convert or be beheaded. Germany, we've seen towns of 3,000 have 2,500 men of military age be imported in there. And of course, there's a UK story out of Rotherham, one of the most famous, where 1,400 girls in this small town became victims of rape jihadists. Paul, I want to ask you, what is the role, as we here in Canada we've already begun our massive migration of these economic migrants, frankly, into our country. What is the role of the state in importing this jihad creep?
Well, I mean, people have asked why would they import huge numbers of people if it's going to cause, social upheaval, which it inevitably will. What benefit does it have for the state? Well, first of all, these people are going to be dependent on government. They're going to have children who become citizens who vote for more government. So if you've got a big government that wants to expand its power, then obviously it's in their interest to import this huge voting block of people. Secondly, and this has just come out in the past couple of days, The EU, which of course has completely failed on this policy, it's an absolute disaster. You have migrants queuing up at the border trying to get in. It's complete chaos. Now they've doubled down and said they're going to introduce a paramilitary force that will be able to operate on EU borders without the consent of national governments. So completely violating national sovereignty. They're talking about 2,500 armed guards, naval patrols, drones. Again, even if the individual nation state says we don't want this force on our border, the EU is crafting a plan right now to do so. So they're using their own failed policy. They rolled out the red carpet in the first place. It's now a complete disaster. But instead of handing the power back to national governments to control their own borders, they're now saying, give us more power, because of course it furthers their interest, which is the expansion of the EU federal superstate and the evisceration of national sovereignty. So those are just two angles from which states have benefited from this migrant crisis, which their own policies created.
Now, I don't think you necessarily have to be fearful of a powerful state. I think that these sorts of notions of liberty and sovereignty are, frankly, on the hearts of just about every single citizen of the Western world. And yet, when it comes to this jihad creep, they have found these bizarre bedfellows, frankly, in the left. I've just returned from Prague and Nuremberg, two very, very different places when it comes to this particular issue. And I met one gentleman, if I can share an anecdote with you, in Nuremberg, and he said, look, I have no problem with the migrants so long as they adopt our way of life. And then I brought up the issue of the niqab, a debate we've had here within just north of the 49th. And he's like, well, yeah, it is sort of antisocial behavior. Maybe we shouldn't do it. And so when you kind of press on it, all of a sudden folks kind of see the light of day and say, yeah, this isn't really what we want in our culture. Couple that with the fact our own prime minister had issues labeling female genital mutilation and so-called honor killings barbaric practices. Talk to me a little bit about this bizarre marriage between the left and, frankly, pushers of jihad creep. And do you sense that there will be a nasty divorce in its future?
Well, we're already seeing a split within some elements of the left who are now calling other liberals, as they claim they are, the regressive left, because they're adopting these politically correct principles which disguise the fact that the religion of Islam, and I know this is, politically incorrect to say, is not tolerant and it's not compatible with Western liberal values, which is why now in Germany, Sweden, Finland, and all these countries, as you alluded to, they're having a huge rape epidemic as a result of bringing these migrants in. The initial victims of that are other Muslim women within these refugee camps. But now also we've had numerous cases in Germany where women living in the local areas are being attacked, sexually abused by these migrants. And what's worse is that the state is covering it up, again, in alliance with left-wingers who ignore this kind of problem. So in Germany, the authorities are not divulging the details of these rape cases, so as in their own words, not to legitimize critics of mass migration. They're going after Germans who make, quote, anti-migrant Facebook posts, enlisting ex-Stasi officials to do so. And of course, this is all justified by the left because they're afraid of criticizing a minority, despite the fact that, frankly, some cultures are better than others. And feminists whine all day about a college rape culture that doesn't exist, has been statistically debunked, while we're actually importing a real rape culture, because you can look at the polls in these countries where these migrants are coming from. And again, 4/5 of them are not from Syria. They're coming from these other countries. You go to the polls in those countries, the vast majority of those people support Sharia law. They support beheading gay people. They support stoning women to death. So we're bringing in an intolerant, real rape culture, and feminists won't talk about it because, again, it would mean criticizing a minority, and that's anathema to them because they're complete hypocrites.
And I'm happy you brought up all of these points, because when we talk about the rape culture of the Middle East, I'd like to remind our viewers that I believe it's 14 times within the Quran that believers are actually encouraged to take on kuffars or infidels as sexual slaves. So that is actually an ingrained rape culture right there, never mind what we see in the likes of our university campuses here in the Western world. Okay, on the topic topic of free speech and this PC culture, my friend Majid Nawaz, he's got a great book, by the way, Radical, if anyone's looking for last-minute Christmas gifts, really fantastic read. He had a great piece this past week in the Daily Beast where he talked about the difference between scrutinizing Islam, which really is a right to any sort of thoughtful academia, and discriminating against individual Muslims. And I want to be clear on this program, what we're doing is the former, not the latter. I want to be able to say, hey, you know what? Muhammad had a 6-year-old wife named Aisha. Yeah, sure, he waited till she was 9 in order to consummate. But in my culture, frankly, the better culture, that's called pedophilia. But when I say that, Paul, I'm called Islamophobic. I'm called a racist, even though Islam is not a race. I'm called every sort of nasty, bigoted name. What is the effect? What is the cost on our future as a society if we cannot exercise our right to free speech on this very issue?
Well, it's the complete evisceration of the right to criticize a religion. That's all it comes down to. And I was actually reported to the police for making some of the same points that you just made. I made a YouTube video basically saying stoning rape victims to death is bad, executing homosexuals is bad, killing people who leave the faith of Islam is bad. Somebody reported me to the British police for doing that. And then again, you mentioned the regressive left and the Majid Nawaz article. They actually listed a devout Muslim American who campaigns against honor killings as an anti-Muslim bigot. So they created this huge list of Islamophobes, and some of them were actually quite devout Muslims who were simply campaigning against things like, FGM, female genital mutilation, and honor killings. So the left has gone completely insane, but in their zeal to virtue signal and prove that they're more progressive than anyone else, they actually expose the fact that they're more regressive than ever before in tolerating what is a completely intolerant religion, which is in need of reform, just as Christianity was reformed back in the 1500s. And we should have the right to say that stoning women to death is bad without being reported to the police for a, quote, hate crime. If that ever becomes the norm, then, we're basically going to have more of these Muslim ghettos, more of this ideology, which is very oppressive and very illiberal, which is why we need more liberals to grow a pair and speak out against it.
And I think that, frankly, there are more liberals growing pairs across the world. But what I'm wondering about is, are they finding their answers in the right or wrong places? And what I mean here is that there seems to be a growing intolerance of political correctness. Couple that with the fact that there is, soft target terrorism on the rise across the world on 3 different continents. And what you see is a rise and success of many political parties that are labeled far right, like Greece's Golden Dawn, the Northern League in Italy, of course, the National Front in France recently, UKIP, by the way, which I think is totally mainstream now, and Donald Trump with the whole, Muslim thing in his remarks. What do you predict will be the future of these so-called far-right parties going into 2016?
Well, they're going to be very successful, for one, but that's because there's been such a vacuum, because there are no actual liberals or very few to criticize the intolerant religion of Islam. So in that vacuum, that emboldens actual neo-Nazis and extremists, and their voices are actually amplified because there's no one else in that environment to talk about these kind of issues. So in ignoring these issues due to political correctness, the regressive left has actually made the voices of neo-Nazis and actual extremists more prominent, because people don't have anywhere else to go for an alternating narrative to what we're hearing in the mainstream media, especially about this refugee crisis. So it's only going to have the effect of emboldening right-wing extremists. As many top security experts in Europe have said, you're going to see more riots. There was one last night in the Netherlands. You're going to see more civil unrest between, Islamists in Europe who have created these ghettos and actual right-wing violent extremists, because there are no real or very few moderate voices to speak out against this. So that's all I'm trying to do in lending my voice to highlighting these issues.
Final question. As we begin to bridge the gap between us and Europe here in North America to import these migrants, do you have a message for us here in Canada and our friends in the States?
Well, in the States, of course, it emerged today that they've already let in 100,000 Syrian refugees since 2012. You look at the polls, 21% of Syrians support ISIS. So I think the policy that you have in Canada, which I believe is still in place, where they've limited the refugee intake to only women, children and families, so unaccompanied men are not allowed into the country. I don't know whether that's still the case, but that was the situation the last I heard. I mean, that is a sensible policy. But obviously, you need to take the risk of being labeled an Islamophobe and a racist, even though Islam isn't a race, because you're importing a culture that is very illiberal, that is anti-free speech, which in many cases poses a direct security threat to your family going forward. And it's not just about jihadists. It's about those Sharia courts that are in the United Kingdom. It's about this mentality that's completely intolerant, that treats women as second-class citizens. That is going to lower the standard of living. It's going to create more of these ghettos in major Canadian and American cities. So that's why you need to have the courage to stand up for truly classical liberal principles and speak out against this insane migrant wave, because it's become an invasion. They're now trying to walk it back. Now it's proven to be a disaster, as we predicted. But people need to stand up for true liberal principles and get past their fear of being politically incorrect.
Paul, I want to thank you for standing up, for taking the risk of being called every name under the sun, because frankly, the stakes are too high. Folks, that's Paul Joseph Watson. You can find him on Twitter at Prison Planet. All right, folks, before we sign off, let's take a look at our quote of honor. This week's comes from French philosophe Voltaire. He writes, "To learn who rules over you, simply find out who you are not allowed to criticize." Well, I know who rules over me, and that is the Lord God Almighty. Lucky for all of us, he doesn't offend too easily. Well, folks, that's a wrap. Tell us what you thought about the show, who you liked, who you didn't like, who you'd like to see on in future shows. You can email me, faith@TheRebel.media, or find me on the tweet machine at FaithGoldy. Until next time, stay vigilant, and remember, we've got your six.